Nights in Spiti are unlike any other nights I've ever known. It's not just cold, it's deep. So deep, you can almost feel space itself contracting, making room for something invisible. Something soft that seeps quietly into every crack of stone, every crevice of snow, and into the folds of your own heart. I'm sitting here now, in a small mud house. Thick walls, a wooden window carved by hand. Outside, the Spiti Valley rests, one of the highest and most remote regions of India, close to the border with Tibet. The night wind brushes through the cracks in the door, carrying the breath of the Himalayas. I pour another cup of tea, letting my hands warm a little, and also letting my mind settle just a little more. If you're listening to this story, imagine with me, we're sitting together beside a small fire. There's no hurry, no need to rush. Just the wind, the moon, the gentle taste of tea, and a long story waiting to be told. Spiti is unlike anywhere else. Here, winter stretches for more than half the year. Life becomes so scarce that everything folds into itself. Quiet. Slow. People here learn how to live slowly. How to listen to the wind sliding through the mountain passes like a silent scripture without words. No need for anyone to explain. Just sit still, and the world, it tells you everything you need to hear. Once, while I was sitting with an old man in Gue, a small village nestled in the valley, I asked him, when a person leaves this world, what do they usually leave behind? The old man looked at me, his gaze slow, as deep as the layers of ice hidden in the mountains. And then he said something that even now, whenever I recall it, sends a chill down my spine. But it's a kind of chill that's gentle, the kind that wakes you up. Some people leave behind monuments. Some people leave behind names. And some people, they leave behind silence. At that moment, I didn't fully understand. But later, when the night fell, when the stars over Spiti shone so bright you could almost see each pulse of their light, I began to feel what he meant. There are those who choose to merge into nature, to let their absence become a kind of legacy. Not a statue for people to look up at, but a quiet presence that keeps the world from tipping too far. In Spiti, I met someone like that. Or perhaps it's better to say, I visited someone like that. A monk who has been sitting motionless for more than 500 years, his body still whole, even though centuries have passed. But what stayed with me wasn't the sight of his preserved body. It was the feeling of standing in front of him, like standing in front of the silence of the Himalayas itself. They say, when he was alive, Sangha Tenzin did not preach to anyone. He didn't build large temples. He simply sat still. He sat until that stillness became part of the valley itself. I don't know about you, but on some nights in Spiti, I find myself wondering, in a world so noisy, so restless, does anyone still remember how to leave behind silence? Or is everything we try to leave just more noise? Have you ever thought about that? When you leave this world, what will you leave behind? A legacy? A monument? Or maybe just a bit of quietness, enough to help the world breathe a little lighter? I've traveled to many places. I've stood before the preserved bodies of many monks. Some of them, their skin still rosy after hundreds of years. Some of them sitting in meditation posture in the snow. Some of them covered in gold. Some enshrined in grand temples. Some become tales of mystical wonder. But when I came to Spiti, I found something entirely different. Not a mystery to spark curiosity, but a question to quietly ask myself. In Gue, no one gives lectures about Sangha Tenzin. No one turns him into a spectacle or layers him in complicated legends. People here simply say, he's still sitting there, keeping the valley from becoming too noisy, keeping the world from tilting too far. That's all. Would you like to hear more of that story? If so, stay with me. Sit a little longer. In the cold night of Spiti, let's listen together about someone who chose to disappear in the most complete way. not by leaving behind an echo, but by leaving behind silence. Nights in Spiti always feel longer than anywhere else. Or perhaps it's because this place is too silent that time seems to slow down. As I continue this story for you, the tea in my cup has cooled a little, but that's all right. Sometimes tea tastes better when it's cooled, because some stories can only be told when the heart has settled enough. Do you remember last time we stopped at the part where I spoke about a monk who has been sitting still for over 500 years, sitting to help the Spiti Valley shed a little of its restlessness. Today, I'd like to tell you a bit more about the days when this story first began. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine Spiti in the 15th century. Back then, this valley was still untouched. There were no paved roads connecting it to the outside world, like there are today. Only stones, snow, and wind. Winters lasted long. The cold seeped deep into the bones, and summers were so dry it felt as if everything was turning to dust. People here lived on whatever they could grow in a year that had only 2 seasons, the season of snow and the season of waiting for snow to melt. There weren't many books. There weren't many scriptures. Just stories passed down from generation to generation, whispered beside the fire. At that time, Tibetan Buddhism was beginning to spread. Caravans of monks carried scriptures from Lhasa, from Ladakh, from distant monasteries, making their way through remote valleys like Spiti. The people of Spiti felt both fear and curiosity toward these monks from far away. They came with their wooden drums, with their chants, and with stories of a different way to live. A way of living not just to survive, but to understand oneself and the world. In those days, Sangha Tenzin appeared. No one knew where he came from. No records, no traces. All they knew was one day when the village of Gue was facing sickness, he appeared. Silently, like a cloud drifting past the mountain. The villagers said they saw a monk walking past the small houses. He said nothing. He just pressed his palms together, smiled softly, and sat down at the edge of the village. No one dared to approach him right away. In this place, strangers are both precious and frightening. But soon they realized this man brought nothing with him but silence. He didn't beg for food. He didn't preach. He just sat there like a new rock that had grown in the village. A rock that knew how to breathe. A rock that could smile. People say when Gu was suffering from sickness and bad harvests, everyone was anxious, afraid. But Sangha Tenzin just sat there. He didn't chant loudly. He didn't perform rituals. He simply sat still. Day after day, the villagers got used to his presence. They left a little food at his door, a bowl of water. He didn't take everything, only what was needed. No one ever heard him give a sermon. No one ever saw him recite long prayers. He just sat there. Sometimes they saw him listening to the wind passing through the mountains. Sometimes he gazed at the sky, as if speaking softly with the clouds. To the villagers, he became part of the landscape, like a stone by the river, always there, and no one questioned why it was there. But strangely, since Sangha Tenzin appeared, the sickness in the village began to fade. Barley started to sprout again. The small stream no longer dried up like before. The villagers didn't know for sure if it was because of him, but in their hearts, they quietly understood. Perhaps his stillness had slowed everything down a little. And when everything slows down, the world becomes softer. Sangha Tenzin never claimed to be anyone special. He didn't call himself a saint. He didn't say he was a healer. He didn't name his actions. He just lived like a small mountain, standing silently, not hoping to be remembered. One time, a young villager dared to ask, "Master, aren't you afraid of death?" Sangha Tenzin smiled. He didn't answer right away. He looked into the boy's eyes and whispered, "Fear of death is because one has never truly lived." That sentence, even now, is still told around the fire. Not as a teaching, but as a story to remember. Then one day, Sangha Tenzin told the villagers he wanted to enter a cave nearby, to sit still a little longer. He didn't say for how long. He just said, "When the earth and sky are quiet enough, I will dissolve into them." The villagers didn't stop him. They simply bowed. They gave him some dried food, and from that day, no one saw him leave the cave again. He sat there until his body became part of the mountain. No one knows exactly when he passed. No one witnessed that moment. But to the villagers, they believe he never really left. He just changed the way he was present. Since then, the people of Gui have called him the invisible gatekeeper of the valley. Not a god, not a saint, just a person who chose to become one with nature, to keep this place forever quiet. I remember the day I stood before that cave. The wind brushed past my shoulder. The stream whispered softly nearby. Inside me, there were no more questions. Only stillness. Can you feel it? That feeling when you know there are some people who leave the world by becoming silence itself. If you still want to hear more, pour yourself another cup of tea. We'll continue about what happened when Sangha Tenzin's body was discovered after the earthquake in 1975. But that is a story for another part. Some stories don't surface until the earth itself decides to reveal them. Sometimes, what is hidden beneath layers of rock and time only comes to light when nature opens a door. In 1975, Spiti trembled. A strong earthquake shook the valley. The mountains cracked. The earth split apart. Part of a cliff near Gu village collapsed that day. Dust and stones filled the air. The sky, usually clear and open, turned gray with debris. And when the dust settled, the people of Gue saw something they could never have imagined. Inside the exposed rock face was a small stone cave. And inside that cave sat a human body, still, in meditation, legs crossed in lotus posture, hands resting gently on the knees, eyes half closed, as if looking inward into a place beyond this world. But what surprised everyone was not just the posture. It was the fact that the body was still intact, the hair still there, the skin still holding to the bones, the teeth perfectly in place. No wrappings, no embalming, no chemicals or preservation methods. Just a human being, sitting quietly in meditation inside the stone womb of the mountain for over 5 centuries. The villagers of Gue knew immediately who it was. It was Sangha Tenzin, the monk who once sat at the edge of the village, the one who had entered the cave and never returned. Some wept, some bowed their heads, some simply stood in silence, looking at the body as if a part of their own story had just been uncovered. They didn't call it a miracle. They didn't label it a holy relic. They whispered softly, "He's still sitting there. That was enough." There are stories passed down through generations in Gue about the day Sangha Tenzin left his body. The elders say, when he passed, a rainbow appeared. But it wasn't the kind of rainbow that comes after rain. It was a strange light arching from mountain to mountain, stretching across the valley. For 3 days, no wind blew through Spiti. The valley, usually filled with the sound of wind, fell silent. Not a single leaf moved. Not a blade of grass swayed. People in Gue believe this was the moment when earth and sky came together to welcome Sangha Tenzin. He didn't die, they say. He simply dissolved into the valley. Since then, the villagers have believed that his body keeps the balance of the land. Not as a god, not as a saint, but as someone who chose to stay. They don't worship him. They don't turn his presence into a spectacle. They just come quietly, to see, to remember. Some say if the body of Sangha Tenzin were ever lost, the valley would fall into misfortune. But others smile and say, it's all right. He's already part of the mountains now. I don't know if these stories are literally true. The rainbow, the 3 days without wind, these are the things people whisper to each other when they sit by the fire. Soft words shared between generations. But I do know this, when you stand before Sangha Tenzin's body, you don't feel fear. And you don't feel superstition. You feel like you're standing in front of something ancient. Like sitting at the foot of a mountain that has always been there. Some people leave behind temples. Others leave behind teachings. And some leave behind silence. And sometimes that silence is the very thing that holds the world together. I remember someone in Gui once told me, elsewhere, people are afraid of bodies that don't decay. Here, we're only afraid of losing the stillness that allows him to keep sitting. I carried that sentence with me when I left the village. Maybe we don't need to understand everything. Maybe it's enough to know that somewhere in a world moving too fast, someone chose to stop, to sit, to dissolve into the land. And sometimes it's the act of sitting that keeps the world in balance. Can you feel that? The sensation of standing before a body that time forgot how to harm. If you'd like to hear more, pour yourself another cup of tea. In the next part, I'll tell you how the people of Gui choose to care for his body today, and why they don't see him as a relic, but as a friend still sitting in the valley. There are stories that don't really end. They stay with us, quietly shaping the way we see the world long after the last word has been spoken. Sangha Tenzin's story is like that. His body remains in Gui village, still sitting, still watching over the valley. But the meaning of that is something each person must find for themselves. Some visitors come to Gui hoping to see a mystery. They expect something extraordinary, something beyond the limits of science. And when they stand before Sangha Tenzin's body, perfectly preserved, seated in meditation, centuries after death, they ask, how can this be? Science offers some answers. The altitude of Spiti, the dry air, the freezing winters, the absence of bacteria in the soil, all of these can slow decay. Researchers explain the process. They study the environment. They take careful notes. But even when the science is clear, the heart feels something deeper, because no scientific explanation can fully describe what it's like to stand in front of stillness that has lasted for centuries. Others come to Gui with faith. They see Sangha Tenzin's body as a sign of deep meditation, perhaps Dzogchen or Thukdam, states where consciousness lingers, where the body remains in balance between life and death. They bow their heads. They light incense. They whisper prayers. So what is this really? A miracle? A phenomenon of nature? A story passed through generations? Or perhaps something else? Maybe it doesn't need to be explained at all. Maybe it's not about the facts we gather, but about the silence that settles inside us when we witness something that humbles the mind and softens the heart. Today, the people of Gui still care for Sangha Tenzin, not as a relic, not as a tourist attraction. They keep him as part of their village life, a quiet guardian of balance. They dust the glass case gently. They offer simple prayers. And sometimes they just sit nearby, saying nothing at all. It's not about worship. It's about respect. About remembering that someone chose to leave the world in the most gentle way possible, by sitting still. In our world today, that idea can feel strange. We measure life by action, by achievements, by movement. We ask, what have you done? But Sangha Tenzin's body asks a different question. What happens when you choose to do nothing? What remains when a person lets go of fame, lets go of the body, and even lets go of the idea of death? What is left when there's no more need to prove anything to anyone? Maybe the answer is presence, a kind of stillness that outlasts centuries. Some people leave behind books. Some leave behind statues. Others leave behind memories. But Sangha Tenzin left behind silence. A silence that continues to breathe through the mountains of Speedy. A silence that asks us to stop for a moment and listen. In the end, maybe the legacy of Sangha Tenzin is not about his body at all. Maybe it's about the pause he left in the world. A pause long enough for us to ask ourselves, in today's fast-moving world, what can we learn from someone who chose to sit still for centuries?